Brian Gearinger, his wife Jane Yang, and their 10-year-old son had a home off of Parker Hill Road. The night of the fire, they escaped that home with no warning from their government or any neighbors or friends. Not able to get the cars out of the garage, they fled on foot. Brian is an attorney. Jane is a head and neck surgeon. For Jane, it's still too painful to talk about the experience. So Brian is telling the story for his family, his community, and the future.
PG&E failed us. And the irony is, I'm a lawyer. 25 years ago, when I was a young lawyer at a law firm, I represented a tree trimmer. We sued PG&E for causing fires because they didn't trim around their trees, they didn't maintain their equipment properly. And that was 25 years ago. And I was also involved, because my client testified, at the criminal trial of PG&E. PG&E was criminally prosecuted in Nevada County in 1996 and convicted for causing a fire up there, for failing to do what they're supposed to do. So we, society, Northern California, we need to figure out how PG&E does what they're mandated by law to do, keep their equipment safer. We had had a soccer game down in Marin County where we drove another boy home, and I have a distinct memory of stopping in Petaluma for hamburgers and coming home, and the contrast, the next day, the next week, was like that happy Sunday evening soccer and just normal night. It seemed like a long time ago once the fire intervened. But we went to bed, and I just remember being windy, really windy. It reminded me of growing up in Ohio and the prelude to a thunderstorm. I remember some point during the night noticing that the power went out, just kind of half awake, half asleep. The ambient noise was off, so I'm like, okay. But the power's gone off before. So we're laying there, and we were both kind of half awake, and my wife just sat up in bed, and she said, "I smell smoke." And my wife is Jane, looked out a patio window, and she's like, "Oh my God." And I looked, and it was off the side of our driveway where our garbage cans and recycling cans are. And there was a fire, and it looked like a campfire. And my mind for the next half an hour during this whole time was just trying to make sense out of things that didn't make sense. And my first thought was, there were some teenagers that they must have, this is a bad prank, or we gotta call the fire department, or call 911. And I'd never called 911 before, and I called 911, and there was nothing. There was no dial tone, there was no music while we were on hold, there was no answering saying you're the third caller in line. There was just nothing. And I remember like, God, that's weird. I've never called 911 before, but I know that there's supposed to be something that happens when you call 911. And then we looked, and the fire's getting bigger. It's spreading quickly. Like, we don't hear anything. There's no sirens. There's no nothing. I'm like, God, this is weird, strange. Because I thought certainly there'd be fire department coming and someone would have alerted. So we got to go get help. So go across the street to our neighbors, the neighbors that we're closest with. And it's windy and banging on the door, and there's nothing. We go to the next house. There's two houses across the street from us, one slightly uphill, one slightly downhill. We go to the one that's slightly downhill, and banging and nothing. And I was like, God, that's weird. It's just weird. And I grew up in a Christian Baptist type church, and for a brief moment I thought, is this the rapture? And it's kind of like running through my mind, trying to make sense out of this chaos. And at that point, our side yard faces uphill. A tree went up, and it didn't burn from the bottom up slowly like a fuse. It went up, and I've said this so many times, my son repeats it, even though he doesn't it went up like a Roman candle. Like, I've never seen anything like it. And going back now, it's about a 60-foot tall tree. And my wife said, "You've got to go warn them." And this was our uphill neighbors. And I'm like, and I just ran up the street from where we were, thinking I told them to stay here, and I ran up there and I banged on their door, and I've described it to people. I was like Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, in the church scene. I'm like, wake up, wake up. There's a fire, and I can see through they've got a window on the side of their door, where I could see through their house, through the back of their house to my house. And now I'm seeing there's like a wall of flames. And I'm like, there's no one here. And again, I couldn't for the life of me figure out why there was no one there, but I was like, well, there's no sense of me, I've tried to warn them, they're not here. So I ran back to Jane and Gail, and it's now hot, like standing too close to a campfire, because this tree is just ablaze. And I had flip-flops, a pair of shorts, a sweatshirt on. I had my reading glasses and my wallet and my keys. I joke, a man never leaves the house without his wallet and his keys. And I said to Jane, should I get a car? And by this time there was a large ornamental shrub against our garage, and it was on fire. And Jane's like, no. And I'm like, okay, well then we've got to go. By this time, embers are flying through the air, big embers. Gail said to Jane, Mommy, I'm getting hit by these embers. And she told him, pull your sleeves down. He had a long sleeve sweatshirt. Pull your sleeves down and hold your sleeves in the palm of your hands to cover your arms. I'm just thinking, we got to get out of here. We're going to walk down the hill. We live on the top of the hill, off of Parker Hill Road. And of course, my wife is in a walking boot because she had ruptured her Achilles tendon that summer and she was still recovering, so she had a walking boot. And her complaint is, after the fire, we ran out with the clothes on our backs. She didn't even have a pair of shoes. She had one tennis shoe. She didn't have a matching pair of shoes. So she's limping, walking with her walking boot. And I never was scared because I was just, most of the time I was confused. And then I was just thinking ahead, like, should we get the car? No, okay, we got to get out of here. And so I was never scared, but at that point, as we're walking down the hill, I could see down a ravine or gully off to my left, and I could see this jagged line of a grass fire, that you see in a news report helicopter where they're looking, and I could see it, and I was like, oh, this is more than just a campfire in our yard that's spread. This is something big. And I thought to myself, and I can't pull up the right word. I was scared, or I had the thought, I'm gonna have to tell my son to run ahead because we can't keep up with him. And I thought, if we're gonna be in the middle of this fire, I just gotta tell him to run and just run. And just then, a car pulls out of this side road. There's a private road, and this car pulls out, and we're like, stop, please help us. And very rarely in your life do you frantically scream help and mean it. And I'm like, help us. And they stopped, and we're like, they just said, get in. And they had a 4-door car. And I just remember their back seat was full of framed pictures, a couple boxes. So they had about 5 minutes to throw all of their stuff in their car. And they're like, get in. And I remember I'm tall and I had trouble getting in. We're just laying on top of their stuff. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, there's a fire, and we just found out and we're getting out of here. I'm like, can you take me to my office? Because I had my keys and I had my wallet. And they drove us to our office, and we're like, hey, we introduced ourselves, and they're Kevin and Maureen, and I've since tracked them down, and we've exchanged some emails. And at some point I want to meet them face to face and thank them, because they rescued us. They were the good Samaritans who helped us. You know, my son's 10, and I want him to watch this, be able to watch this someday, 20 or 30 years from now, through adult eyes. And I think he might get a glimpse or an understanding of how much Jane and I love him, and how much we really focused exclusively after the fire to make things normal, starting with getting this house and deciding we're not going to be victims. He's not a victim, and you know, knock on wood, I think we succeeded. And you know, it's a work in progress.